Oh, okay. So if we get started, thanks so much everyone for coming. I'm your host tonight. My name's Neve. Really excited for this, the next instalment of the GovTech Leaders Meetup series. We're going to talk about something that's really topical. It's all over the news at the moment, so I hope this can provide some really useful insights for you all. Yeah, just a couple of things to note. This session is being recorded. So if you speak or if your camera's on, you might be a part of that. And if you do have any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat because we will be fielding some questions throughout and at the end as well. So yeah, if there's anything that you want to bring up, please feel free to add that in. Yeah, so we've got 4 great speakers tonight. The first speaker is Daniel. So he has been studying AI for a very long time. He did his undergraduate, his master's and PhD around artificial intelligence. He's now the Chief AI Officer at WPP, amongst many other things that I'm sure he can share with you. So yeah, Daniel, if you want to take it away.
Happy to. Can you just remind me how long I'm allowed to speak for? 2 hours, was it?
Yeah, I don't know if I'll be able to stop you.
How long, just remind me?
Yeah, if we aim for around 15-20 minutes.
Perfect. Do you mind if I just share my screen? Is that okay?
Yeah, you work away.
Fantastic. All right, just give me a moment. I'm going to ask those magic words. Can you see my screen? Can you see some slides? I can see some thumbs up. Fantastic. Okay, great. Yes, yeah. So we are going to cover 2 things. I guess I'm going to share a different way of thinking about AI. We will also talk about some of the macro impacts that these technologies are going to have on society. So yeah, a little bit about me. So I wear 2 hats for the past 25 years. I've been researching AI. I ran a master's program actually in UCL where I had hundreds of students going out there applying these technologies to solving problems across a whole range of different industries. And I'm currently entrepreneur in residence for UCL, so I help them spin out companies like DeepMind. I started a company 15 years ago that's been building AI solutions for some of the biggest companies in the world. We were acquired by WPP, which is the biggest media company in the world, 2 years ago, where I take on Chief AI Officer. So I oversee AI across 120,000 people, and I get to invest in AI companies now, which is good fun. I usually do an hour's talk. I'm going to condense an hour's talk into 15 minutes, but obviously, there's a huge amount of excitement about getting your data together, and we see organizations building data lakes. I would argue it's not the right thing to do, but anyway, for the past 10 years, companies have been hiring my students, data scientists, machine learning experts to extract insights from data. I would argue, controversially, that's been a misinvestment. Extracting more insights from data and expecting humans to make better decisions typically doesn't work. Humans are bounded by our ability to make decisions. And I would argue that companies don't have machine learning problems, they have decision problems. Decision making at the top there is a completely different field in computer science. If you're old enough, it used to be called operations research, it's discrete mathematics, it's optimization. Again, I would argue there's less than 3,000 incredibly strong optimization experts around the globe. What you need to do in an organization is solve your optimization or your decision problem first algorithmically and work backwards and figure out what insights can help you make better decisions and what data then can help you extract the insights. Now, if I build a system that I give data to and it makes a decision, and tomorrow I give it the same data, it makes the same decision, what you have is automation. And automation is amazing because we can get computers to do things better than human beings. But the definition of stupidity is doing the same thing over again and expecting a different answer. I would argue that by definition, automation is stupid. By definition, it is not intelligent. I know that everybody that currently touches this technology stack is calling themselves an AI company. That's fine because you get more clients, you get more VC funding. But there are 2 definitions of AI. The first definition is getting computers to do things that humans can do. And it's a weak definition, but over the past decade, we've managed to get machines to do things that traditionally only human beings can do, recognize objects and images, correspond in natural language. And because humans are the most intelligent thing we know in the universe, when we get machines to behave like humans, we assume that that's intelligence. I don't have time to convince you all that humans are not intelligent. That's a different talk. But there's actually a much better definition of AI that comes from a definition of intelligence. So instead of using human beings as a definition of intelligence, there's this, which is goal-directed adaptive behavior. It's a beautiful definition. Goal-directed in the sense you're trying to achieve an objective, you're trying to route your vehicles to maximize deliveries, or you're trying to place your warehouses to maximize distribution, or allocate your workforce to maximize well-being, whatever. You have to have a goal, and it's usually a complex objective function. Behavior is how quickly you can answer that question. Now, just to give you some mathematics, if I've got 5 staff members that I need to allocate to 5 jobs, 5 people to allocate to 5 jobs, I've got a 5 factorial, 5 exclamation mark, 120 possible ways to allocate 5 people to 5 jobs. If I've got 15 people to allocate to 15 jobs, I now have over 1 trillion possible ways. To expect a human to solve that problem, you're wasting your time. One rule to take away with you today: anything more than 7, don't use a human for. So if my goal is to allocate people to work in an optimal way, then anything more than 7 you shouldn't be using human for. Now, in fact, actually, if you've got 60 people to allocate to 60 jobs, there are more possible combinations than there are atoms in the universe. Being able to answer that question, that goal, quickly and well is very, very hard. And if you choose the wrong algorithm, it will take longer than the age of the universe. If you choose the right algorithm, it can take milliseconds. But the key word in this definition is adaptive. What you want to do is build systems that make decisions, learn about whether those decisions are good or bad, adapt themselves so that next time they make better decisions. And if I'm being totally honest and controversial, you don't see adaptive systems in production. Almost everything that we see in production is automation. So I would actually argue that by definition, almost nobody is doing AI. It's not very helpful, so I'll give you a different way of thinking about AI, but just a little bit of a history lesson. This is AI in the 60s and 70s. It was Socrates before he drinks hemlock. Socrates is famous for inspiring the Socratic method. So if I say to you, Socrates is a man and all men are mortal, I can infer that Socrates is mortal. We would write down lots of rules, and then we would try to infer new knowledge from those rules, and it didn't really scale, it didn't really work. So in the 80s and 90s, a new type of AI came along that's modeled on how brains work. This is the brain of a bumblebee. My PhD 20 years ago was trying to take a million neurons, the brain of a bumblebee has 1 million neurons, and model it in a machine. Bumblebees can do amazing things. They navigate 3D worlds, they recognize objects, they talk to each other, they don't handle windows very well, but ultimately they're very smart creatures. And the question was, can you model 1 million neurons in a machine? 20 years ago, you can't. Now we can model billions of neurons in a machine, and we can teach these brains to do things that humans can do. This is what we call large language models. I would argue these brains are really good at knowing things about the world. They're really good at even telling you what they know about the world. They are not good at reasoning, and they are definitely not good at complex decision making. This is the true paradigm of AI are using these types of technologies to extract knowledge from the world, using these types of technologies to reason and make decisions to achieve your goal, and then build systems that safely adapt themselves in production. And most organizations are 1 million miles away from this. So I actually recently, over the past few years, I've been thinking about AI not through definitions, not through technologies, but through applications. And I believe there are 6 flavors or categories of application of AI that I've seen over the past 15 years. Now, the first category is task automation. Now, task automation gets a bad reputation in the AI community. It's using basic algorithms, if then else statements, robotic process automation, whatever, macros, to replace mundane, repetitive tasks that human beings are doing with essentially a very simple solution. The fact is, these technologies can drive a huge amount of value, even though they are simple. The second category is content generation, and WPP, I think, generate 1/4 of the world's content. Again, we know that because of large language models, pretty much anybody over the next few years are going to be able to generate any generic content, whether it be text or imagery or video. The trick is being able to generate specific content. And so we're going to start to see a specialization of content generation, which I won't bore you with right now. The third category is human representation. So this is where we can replace humans that are the interface with things that look and behave exactly like a human. And what's exciting about large language models is that actually we can replace, we can train large language models to represent audiences. So historically, it would be very hard to know how people think. When you look at a piece of content, you create a complex narrative in your mind that has nostalgia and emotion and excitement, whatever. We historically weren't able to recreate that narrative, but because of large language models, we now can, which means we can start to peer inside people's brains and use that as insights to make good decisions. Now, the fourth category is what people have been excited about over the past 10 years, and I think a massive misinvestment. We've been using machine learning to extract insights from data, hoping that those insights will lead to better decisions. They typically don't. But what's really powerful about these technologies is not their ability to predict things in the world, but their ability to explain why those behaviors exist. And that those explanations actually can then be used for better decision making. Decision making is hard. Again, I don't have time to convince you of this, but most of the problems that people are dealing with in their organizations are these complex, infinite, exponential problems. Human beings are solving them badly, or they're using algorithms from the 80s that are also solving them badly. The differentiator for organizations right now is to use better algorithms to make better decisions. The final category is human augmentation. And again, a few years ago, I'd be talking about exoskeletons, I'd be talking about cybernetics, I'd be talking about building a digital version of you in the metaverse. But just to bring this home a little bit, one of the things that we do for one of the biggest brands in the world, this is going to sound creepy, but it's cool, I promise you, is that we take a large language model and we train it on their employee data. So each one of you has your own digital twin. Each one of you has your own large language model trained on your data. And then I ask your digital twin, if I put you on this project, will you work well? If I put you on this team, will you thrive? So I can use AI to essentially augment and make better decisions with humans. Now, I like this framework, not because I invented it, but because it helps you navigate this complex world of AI security and safety and ethics and governance. And as far as I'm concerned, this is a massively convoluted world. The types of questions that you need to ask yourself when dealing with task automation are very different when dealing with building digital representations of employees, where you can identify secret lovers in companies, or you can predict that people are going to leave before they know they're going to leave. And also, of course, the impact that these applications have on people's lives will also dictate the level of transparency and auditability and explainability. If you're not going to have a material impact on people's lives, I would argue they probably don't need to be transparent. If you're going to have a material impact, then they need to be explainable and transparent and all that governance stuff. So this is a framework that I use and have been using for many years to navigate and how to apply these technologies to driving value in business. And I think I've grown a very successful company in doing this. So I'm going to now move towards the macro impact of these technologies. And again, it's something that I've been thinking about for over 2 decades. I did a TEDx talk a few years ago where I argued that there are a pestle of singularities. You've probably all heard of the singularity. We're all LinkedIn AI philosophers now, but singularity is a point in time that you can't see beyond. And it was adopted by the AI community to refer to the point in time where we build a super intelligence, which is a brain 1,000,000 times smarter than us. I think that there is a pestle of singularities. There are at least 6 singularities, 6 points in time that are very difficult to see beyond. And I've used this macro framework to try to capture some of the concerns. And by the way, I use this framework to help governments understand how to navigate what type of AI are they trying to regulate to mitigate what risks. The question of should AI be regulated is nonsensical. The question should be, what are the risks associated with these technologies and how do we mitigate those risks? So let me just go through very quickly. The first risk is essentially what I call the political singularity, which is a world where we no longer know what is true. It's a post-truth world. We know that these technologies, misinformation bots, deep fakes, have not only challenged our political foundations, they're now challenging the fabric of our reality. Pretty much everybody now has the ability to clone and represent everybody else. With 3 seconds of somebody's voice or with a picture of them, you can represent who they are, and then you can use that to essentially create crime. So I don't know what the world will look like if we no longer know what is true. I'm pretty convinced that AI won't be able to identify deep fakes. So what we need to do is we need to get governments to regulate to ensure that any content that's being put out there, that's being propagated, needs to be authenticated, and it needs to demonstrate provenance. And my industry, the media marketing industry, needs to play a significant role in ensuring that we don't create a post-truth world. The environmental singularity is something we're all familiar with. Consumption, as far as I'm concerned, gives people access to goods and services that typically enrich their lives. Yes, there are people that overconsume. Yes, it is putting pressure on our planetary boundaries. But I believe that if you apply these technologies in the right way, and I don't think they have been applied in the right way based on my experience over the past several years, but if we apply them in the right way, we can halve the amount of energy required to produce everything that we're producing on the planet. If you apply them in the right way, you can reduce the amount of petrol required to do deliveries, et cetera, et cetera. I think we can halve the amount of energy. So yeah, that's something I'm very passionate about. The third category or singularity is not my area of expertise, but there are scientists that believe there are people alive today that won't have to die. AI is advanced in medicine. It's able to monitor ourselves. It's able to clean ourselves out. And a bit like a car, if we stay on top of damage, we will never die. And I don't know what the world will look like if we realize there are people amongst us that won't have to die, not to mention overpopulation and all that fun stuff. The technological singularity is something we're all familiar with, which is where we build a brain smarter than us in every single possible way. I guess, you know, for the past 20 years, my community, my peers thought that this wasn't going to happen until 2040, 2050. We probably think it might happen now in the next 10, 20 years. And I think that this is, you know, could be the most glorious thing that happens to us. It could be our biggest existential threat. I thought we had 40, 50 years to solve this problem. Now, I don't think we do, but I'm pretty sure that when this thing comes along, if it sees us as a threat, then it will remove us from the equation. So we've got 20 years to figure out how to make sure that we're not a threat to this thing when it comes. The legal singularity is when surveillance becomes ubiquitous. So, you know, we know that, you know, there are governments, there are organizations that not only know so much about you, but they also have the ability to manipulate your behaviors to benefit themselves. And that's an incredibly powerful position to be in. And there are already structures and rules and regulations and in place to try to mitigate and decentralize and decouple those powers of control. But these technologies are incredibly powerful, and they do enable people to accumulate wealth and power. The final singularity, before I close, is my favorite singularity. It is coined by a very good friend of mine called Callum Chase. I'd highly recommend his books, particularly this Surviving AI. So this is the concern about job losses. Now, I've been using AI for the past 15 years to remove friction from the creation and dissemination of goods. And friction, by the way, usually means human labor. Now, historically, all of those people have gone on to do more interesting things. The concern, I guess, that this community has, that Callum have, I guess that I have, is that the pressure for organizations to reduce costs, to increase profits, means that when we can free up whole jobs, we probably will. And over the next 10, 15 years, we might see mass technological unemployment. We will have social unrest because people won't be able to retrain fast enough to get new jobs, because any new jobs we could create will probably be taken by an AI. That's the concern. Now, controversially, Callum, myself, others think we should be strategically automating as fast as possible. We should be accelerating as fast as possible towards the singularity. Bear with me. What we can do is, if we can remove the friction from the creation and dissemination of food, healthcare, education, transport, energy, we can bring the cost of those goods down to zero. Imagine being born into a world of abundance, a world where you don't have to work to pay for the things that enable you to survive and thrive. And now people say to me, Daniel, what would I do if I didn't have to work? I know lots of people who don't have to work. In theory, I don't have to work for the next 5 lifetimes. I'm working harder now than I've ever worked. Most of the people that I know that don't have to work, they're not sitting at home bored and depressed. They're using their time and their assets to try and contribute positively to humanity. And I bet if I asked everybody on this call, what would you do if you didn't have to work? You'll say, I'll travel, I'll indulge in my hobbies, I'll spend more time with my friends and families. If I keep pushing you, most people will say the same thing, which is they want to do something that contributes positively to the environment or other people's lives or animals. Most people want to try and contribute positively to humanity. And I personally think that we can use AI to unlock people from economic constraints. There are too many people born into the world in economic constraints. We can free them up from those economic constraints to contribute to humanity however they want. So I'll ignore this. It's not important. So I'm just going to close by saying it's not good enough anymore for organizations to have a strong, profitable business model. You need to have a purpose. If you don't have a strong purpose, you're not going to attract talent, you're not going to attract customers. I actually believe that it's the collective purpose of enterprise and government that will make the world better. I don't think anybody knows what the world will look like beyond the next 10 years, but I know that it's within our gift. So WPP's purpose is to free people up, to enable them to use their creativity to make the world better. I think a better world is a world where everybody is free economically to contribute to humanity however they want. And that's the world that I want to create. So on that note, I'm going to stop and shut up.
Wow, thank you so much, Daniel. That was great. I feel really lucky that I've been able to learn so much from that. It's definitely given me a lot of insight into it, a lot more than I knew before. Thanks. Great. Okay, so next up we have the lovely Angela. Now, Angela is a Principal software craftsperson at Codurance. I was practicing that one, getting them the right way around, and yeah.
Don't, I get it wrong every time I do a talk. I'm always like, so don't worry.
Yeah, so over to you, Angela.
Right, I will share my screen now. So I forgot my permissions correct here. Right, share screen. Desktop. Right, so hopefully you can see my screen. Oops, there you go.
Yep, all good.
Brilliant. Right, so I'm going to actually be going through very similar points actually, so to do with applications, but rather than going through 100 points, I'm going through a lot more the softer side of things. I'm not the biggest expert when it comes to AI. I'm someone who is very much a hobbyist. You'll see behind me, I've got my own robots. So when the uprising happens, I am probably the first to go, because even from here I have another up there and another down in the corner. So please make sure that you don't do this in my lifetime, please. So fingers crossed I'll survive. Anyway, so when it comes to these things, I'm actually someone who is often quite an anti-magpie. So I've always referred to developers as often magpies. We always go for the shiniest thing. Everyone wants to currently talk about machine learning and artificial intelligence. And when it comes to that, I don't generally think that's always the best move. Sometimes you've got to stick with what's tried and tested. So your machine learning is a lot more tried and tested. It does need constant retraining, admittedly, but ultimately those things are probably more suitable for live systems at this moment for most businesses. However, when it comes to my own private projects, I do have a habit of going down into rabbit holes and trying 101 things. You'll see from here, I love playing with image editing. On there, those are genuinely images that I have used in retrospectives even. So we use these to enhance what we are doing in the team and make sure that we actually make it a bit more fun. And by adding AI to anything, you can generally get engagement from any developer. It's a top tip for anyone trying to sort of work on things like retrospectives. So the next one. So one of the things I think is quite important is how we can benefit. As has already been said, everything needs to be driven by data. Data is obviously, it's objective. It doesn't necessarily have its own opinions. It can be consistent in what it does. It also allows you to, as said before, do things 24 hours a day. It allows you to provide 24-hour support without actually having to have a person behind a screen 24 hours a day. You can reduce your staffing levels just by having an AI doing part of that work. And for a lot of these roles at the moment, it's really hard to fill them. Not because, as everyone keeps saying, people don't want to work. It's just people don't necessarily have the right skills to do those jobs. They need the retraining and things like that. They don't get decision fatigue. Think of the amount of time you'll spend when you're working, and ultimately, if you have to constantly keep doing things, you end up, by the end of the day, you're knackered, you don't remember, and you're going to make mistakes in what you're doing. As a human, that's expected. You're not going to get that from AI, and so it is important for us to use these items for the benefit of what we are doing in any technology system, to be honest. So I've got to use my clicker apparently. So there's a lot of ethics. So I'm kind of going to go into more very much the fluffy side of this sort of thing and point out there is actually a lot of algorithmic bias. Majority of data that actually feeds into AI systems comes from things like movies. The RIS test actually shows that, I think it's something ridiculous, that over 90% of movies are intrinsically racist. So they will actually when you look at the data put into a lot of the language models, a lot of them are using movie scripts and that information. So ultimately it does have biases included in there. So we've got to be very careful with that sort of thing. You also have biases in regards to the people who are coding it. If you think about on there's a system, it's not to do with AI, but going by data, we put in, what's it called? Seatbelts. Seatbelts are something that all of us accept are really, really important in the world. And it's great if you are a man. If you are a woman, you are 47% more likely to be injured and 17% more likely to die than a man in the same crash, because it's not designed for you, because the data was not designed for you. Ultimately, a lot of these systems, by either their algorithms or the data feeding into them, they are often have these prejudices, whether intentional or not. It's important to have accountability, whether it's because you are making decisions on these things, or it could even be to do with the 101 different aspects of GDPR. And I'm going to try and not say compliance too much because that will take me down a rabbit hole, and it's slightly one of the things I'm slightly obsessed with, I will admit. And I think I just lost someone. And ultimately, what you end up doing is you've got to justify what you have done and what you have automated, how you've automated it, and why that decision was made, to also allow for things to be overridden. There are times when you have to take into account neurodiversity. Neurodiversity means that due to the way that our brains are wired, some people need to have different things. There need to be reasonable accommodations. If I don't want to have my camera on in a meeting because I'm feeling rubbish that day, should I really be penalised against? And yet that is something that a lot of people do use as a piece of data to decide whether someone is interacting. Just because I'm visible on a camera doesn't mean I'm actually paying attention. It just means you can see me and I look like I'm paying attention, whereas actually I'm on Facebook down there on my other computer. The other issue that you've got, as has already been mentioned, is the socioeconomic impact. Unfortunately, a large amount of the information that a lot of the things that we are automating are ultimately taking jobs away from the lesser skilled people, and therefore minorities have higher effects. There are worse effects on any sort of economically struggling demographic are more likely to be affected by these things. We need to be upskilling those, making sure that we include those in the conversation so that they can be part of the movement, because it's all well and good saying, well, you don't have to work anymore, but if you're not working anymore, you still need money, unfortunately. We live very much in a capitalist world. If you are on the low on the socio-economic scale, and if I can get my words out, ultimately you aren't going to have that luxury. So having all of these lower level jobs going actually is going to cause us a lot of issues in that sense, in regards to whether it is actually the right thing to do to keep everybody in an equal playing field in regards to work. The last one is, I'm going to say compliance a lot now, I will openly admit. I love compliance, and ultimately I find it an interesting subject. It's really important to make sure that we are doing things correctly. GDPR covers a hell of a lot, and we inherited it from the EU, and personally I think that's a good thing. Feel free to block me on LinkedIn, whatever you want to do, it's absolutely fine. It's really important because a lot of these models are storing information in a way that they can be used. It can ultimately, I put in my CV the other day into ChatGPT to go, right, I would like a quirky summary of this person's CV. It came up with something absolutely ridiculous. I loved it. I sent it to everyone because it was hilarious to read. Not true, but ultimately it was fascinating to sort of read what it came up with. But that now means, in theory, that my data is now in there because all of these systems hold this there. It ultimately has a GDPR issues in regards to the longevity of the data and also how it's going to be used moving forward. The other thing is, think about the number of people who are writing code. A lot of us go to Stack Overflow. I've spoken to people recently who generally couldn't understand and comprehend the idea of coding before the internet. Apparently, these people are now in the workforce and joining us, and I'm very, very scared at how old I am getting. And ultimately, we go into these systems, we go into Stack Overflow, we go into ChatGPT and say, can you refactor this? Can you give me an example code of this? And that was just ChatGPT because it was the easiest one for me to go to this morning when I realized how empty this side was. The thing we're all worried about, though, is ultimately that last one of, are they going to come over? Are they going to take over? Is Skynet actually going to happen? It's not. Skynet's actually already in the sky. It was actually a set of, what's it called? Satellites. It's a satellite system. There's a network of satellites. It's there. It's actually nothing to do with that. But we can understand why there is going to be an issue there in regards to where it's actually going to be used, and also if I'm going to be attacked one day by my child robots. I don't think we're going to be there, hopefully, in my lifetime. Otherwise, I will be the first to go. So, my final thoughts. I don't have spend as long. I'm generally not the one who is as qualified as my predecessor here. We need to be very, very aware in regards to the legislation when it comes to AI. Ultimately, the persistence is really important, the intellectual property. We've already had cases taken by Samsung and Amazon in regards to their code being input into these systems and then being available to everyone because it was obviously then incorporated into its knowledge base. Oops. those things ultimately are public. So the way to get around that is there are so many systems in place now to have privately hosted AI. So if you want to use these things with your personal data, with that, you should always make sure that it's private. Don't go and put your contact details in ChatGPT unless you really, really want that creepy person down the road getting your details. The other thing is it needs support. At the end of the day, an AI is great at doing a lot of things. It can do one. My opinion is though, as it can say on there, it can enhance things. It can make things better. We've had people looking into. It's called Copilot, which I believe is the GitHub code thing. It's ultimately like auto filling in on steroids. It's amazing, and it's providing so much help and allows us to do things like pairing, but without actually needing a pair. Which, if you're part of the sort of software craftsmanship thing, and I'm definitely doing the company line here, ultimately it allows you to do pairing with if your pair isn't available, or it can also allow you to quickly get another idea, but it needs human intervention. It also needs massive human intervention when drawing hands, and hence why I decided to do that. Also trombones. Trombones are another thing they really struggle with drawing. The other thing is I think that AIs, if they are targeted, are great. All of these AIs have their purposes. ChatGPT is actually great when it comes to language manipulation. I gave it my CV, I copied my CV in, and I got it to do summaries. I got it to redo things. I got it to reword my summary statement that I had on LinkedIn to make it more succinct. I've used it to reduce the length of a paragraph if I've got a character count or whatever that I've got to limit. In this case, on there, I've translated something into pirate, and genuinely, I'm not going to do it because my pirate accent is terrible, and genuinely, I'm already mortified that my co-workers heard me doing this earlier when I kind of read it to one of them. But I do think AIs do have their place. They can be a master of one. ChatGPT is great at that. The image ones are great at giving you inspiration. If you're an artist and you want to go, I kind of want to look at this, it can give you a load of pictures. There are so many I've used throughout this. I've used Crayon, C-R-A-I-O-N. I've used Night Cafe, as it says on that one. One of my favorite ones is Imagine.art. All of these are great for just kind of doing a little bit of fun here and there, adding a picture to your presentation, which doesn't have any issues when it comes to copyright in theory. I don't know if we're going to have issues in future with these people expecting it to be their property. I'm not going to worry about that at the moment. But ultimately, if we pick the right AI, it can obviously provide us with a lot of benefits. And that's my details. So if anyone wants to talk about compliance and lose maybe an hour or two, feel free to get in touch. Or if you just want to have a chat about any of these things, I'm more than happy. So.
Great, thank you so much, Angela. And I believe we've actually had a question in the chat. Let me see if I can pull that one up. So the question is, how do you level out the data sets that AI is analyzing, or is it up to us as humans to monitor what AI is generating and judge whether it's biased?
I think it's both. I'd be interested to see what very much the experts have to say, because they are working with it on a daily basis. My opinion is that human monitoring is essential at the moment in AI, because ultimately we are the ones with ethics. We are the ones who understand right and wrong, and we can understand the sort of nuances of things like I've said before with neurodiversity. The other thing is, when it comes to the data sets, we are the ones who control what we feed them. If we're feeding them lots and lots of newspaper articles from, I'm not going to say which ones, but if you were to pick a newspaper of whatever opposite political standing that you have, you are going to argue with that AI forever, because it's going to have the opposite opinions to you. But ultimately, we've just got to make sure that when we are feeding an AI data, we are feeding it clean data and fair data by whatever standards you consider fair. I liked the Viz test. It's a fascinating concept of what I heard a talk about it in Manchester last year, and it's scary to think about how biased a lot of the language data is that we are using. Because if you ask ChatGPT if it's biased, it says no. It says it's a language model or whatever. It doesn't understand that it's ultimately determined by its data. But it is literally our job to feed it the right things, in the same way as you would a child. At the end of the day, if you were to feed a child the same information that we had many years ago, they're going to be racist, they're going to be misogynistic, they're going to become bullies if that's what they are fed. And it's no different with AIs, I don't think.
That's really helpful, thank you. And we've actually had another question as well. I don't know if anyone wanted to add anything onto that one before we move on. No.
I can add. So by the large language models, by their nature, are biased. That's just how they work. They generalize the world, and AI has been cyclic over the past 70 years. We used to have what are called agent-based systems. You have these different kind of agents that have different pieces of knowledge or specialisms about the world, and then it didn't really work. And then we had brains, and then we had agent-based systems, then we have brains again, which is now, and the next iteration essentially is going to be having all of these brains all have different perspectives, different biases, to essentially get them to coordinate, argue, to come up with a better solution. And so one of the things I'm doing is I'm building what I call a council of responsible AI brains, where I essentially create a large language model that's trained on a political party or a culture or a minority group or a newspaper or whatever. And what I can do is I can show those brains content and I can see how they react to it, so I can get their perspectives. So I think, to answer the question, I think we can use AI to help us understand how things are going to be perceived or land, but we also can use human beings. But I would also agree with Angela that it's the intent that needs to get scrutinized from an ethics perspective. Linking the word bias with ethics I think is incorrect. If you build a system that is biased, essentially it's going to make the wrong answer, give the wrong answer sometimes, which is a safety problem. It's not an ethics problem. And I think we confuse the two.
No, it's really interesting. Thank you. And I think we've had a couple more questions. So Keval was wondering if AI could potentially replace job roles within the data space or business intelligence. He joined a little late, so he said if this has already been discussed, he apologizes. I think we did touch on it a bit, but yeah.
So yes, so I think ultimately anything that humans can do, we can probably get AIs to do. That's my kind of summary.
Perfect. Okay. And before we move on, does anyone have any further questions for the first two speakers? No? Cool. Okay. So next we're going to be coming to Sebastian. Sebastian is an AI ethics researcher at AI Tech UK. So yeah, Sebastian.
Hi, good evening, everyone. So I wanted to share my screen, but I'm not going to share my screen because the insights so far is quite interesting. So we're just going to have a relaxed evening and talk about some of the questions that I've actually come up with. Is can AI generating or AI generator help us to judge what bias is? So what we'll be looking at this evening, or what I'll be talking about, is set out how we can reduce bias in our system. So and I agree with you, Daniel, when you said that it's it's not correct when you measure bias as against ethics. And Angela, just come to think of it, I mean, if algorithm happens to be a human being, the algorithm will be asking, so why are you saying I'm biased, whereas it's the data that you're feeding into my system? So yeah, so it's kind of interesting how things are actually turning out. So I'm Sebastian. I'm a data scientist with University of Cambridge, specialized in natural language processing, also an AI ethics researcher at AI Tech UK. And super excited, we are launching our ethical management tool in a few weeks from now. All right, so let's look at what bias is. Bias is just more like an inclination, a prejudice that results in favoritism or discriminating against, say, specific individuals or groups. So part of the characteristics could be the protected characteristics in quote that ranges from the race, the gender, the age, or socio-economic status. Let's just look at some of the bias that we've seen out there in in the real world. So majorly from a big company, a credit card company, that were accused of gender bias. And what was the outcome? They give credit loan more, they give less credit facility to women and give more to men. And as a result, they were spotted or fined for discriminating in terms of gender bias. So another company, which I'm not going to mention them, actually created a hiring tool, and they created a kind of, they were also faulted in terms of having bias in their system, where they predicted women, the system discriminates women who applies for tech jobs, and more especially in the software engineering side of things. Angela, it's good to know that you're a software engineer. So that system actually discriminates women. And another thing they spotted in that system that they built also was it discriminates people whose name are not within Europe, or non-European names. So you could see the problem that it's having, the problem such algorithms create. And another interesting one is the UK Commission for Racial Inequality. They discovered that the British medical school are guilty of discrimination. And what happened is that the computer program they use in creating that only accepts or discriminates against women, and also non-European names as well. Then what they try to do, they try to put aside the algorithm and decide to now hire based on human decision. And Daniel, I agree with you when you said that decision making is so hard. That's the truth. Decision making is so hard. So they try to look at it. Now, at the end of the day, they achieved high accuracy, but you now see that they now had more of women who are non-European. So you're trying to solve one problem and you're getting into another problem. And we all need to be careful about this, because sometimes when we identify bias and we want to solve such bias, it creates more bias within the system. But we have a whole lot of problems. We have a lot of challenges in implementing AI bias. One is the data. Of course, I'm not going to say the algorithm, because the algorithm is not a living thing. An algorithm means a set of instructions that you give to computer. So why do you want to say the algorithm is the one propagating the bias? So data is the main thing. And because the data, if data contains bias when it's being trained, when algorithm is being trained, it actually reflects on it. And when you now look at people talking about using historic data, because this is what I do day to day, trying to identify bias within the ecosystem. So when you now look at people looking at historic data, you see that it reflects societal bias and inequalities. Therefore, what do you do and how do you resolve that? Now, I'm going to talk about one of the challenges, which is algorithmic transparency. And you see that with the presence of bias in an AI algorithm, different fields of AI are actually increasing and giving more insight. Example is the explainable AI, responsible AI. And you see that some algorithms are it's hard for you to make a conclusion how they got to the decision or got to the prediction that they've actually they made. And example of it is the neural network, which is kind of high complex and opaque, and the understanding on how the decisions are being made it's a problem. Now, the fairness is also one of the challenges in implementing AI bias. Researchers, even as at now, what may be fair to me may not be fair to you. So it's a very big problem. How do we now draw that line to have a big definition of what fairness is all about? And you see that striking that balance between fairness and other desirable outcomes, such as the accuracy, efficiency, can be a tall order to identify. Then how do you then measure the fairness, even if you got to the point of creating that? But I want to draw our attention to a very good research that three researchers Alexandra et al. Made, and they discovered that they demonstrated how that a model cannot conform to many group of fairness when you have different group of fairness together, and unless they are under a specific conditions, and such conditions could also drive bias in that process. So it seems a bit difficult on how we can solve these bias issues. But let's look at it. So humans are actually the perpetrators of such bias, and part of such bias are cognitive in nature. Now, we've already have a documented insight of different cognitive biases that we have out there. But before we could talk about bias, are there things we need to do from human perspective within the industry that we need to that will help us in solving that bias? And the answer is yes. For example, many people set up data science team, build data science team. And I agree with Daniel when he said that people don't have, companies don't have machine learning problem. What they have is human problem. That's actually resonated with me, because when you look at it, you see that many people build data science team without understanding the requirements that exist within the data science team. It's at the long run that they discovered such problem. Now, if you want to build a data science team or an AI product or anything, one, you need to have a diverse team. Why do we preach about inclusivity and diversity? You see that organizations that don't have inclusivity and diversity, they kind of not reach out to the optimal or to the progress that they expect in life. But when you have a team that are diverse in nature, that will help to reduce 60 to 65% of bias that you're going to have within the system. So the diverse team will kind of ensure that diverse representations in the data and the AI platforms are being spotted out. Now, what you need to do, I mean, data science team, of course, I'm in one of the teams. So you see companies spend a lot in training their data science teams and engineers and building architectures, but they fail to put them on a design thinking training. This is very big when we look at training individuals outside from the scope of what they do and building a design thinking within them. And what this would do is to inculcate in them to understand the user needs and challenges when they are trying to design an AI product or an AI system. Again, the tools that AI systems use kind of is not transparent. So we need to come to that point where all the tools we use as a data scientist, as a data engineer, AI expert, needs to be transparent and meet two of this, the fairness and being explainable. Having talked about that, now let's look at some of the solutions on how we've tried to mitigate bias within our system. One, we can use AI as well to fight, to mitigate or to reduce bias in the system. We all know that the truth of the matter is that the AI system has actually helped in decision making. So if I throw it up, it could be a debate. I've actually helped in the traditional human thinking and decision making, and that's the truth. So we can use AI system itself to look at how to reduce bias within the system. But we need to be careful, because when we are training the data that we are trying to pass through the algorithm or through the AI system, if we don't spot out the algorithm within that system, it becomes difficult, because that AI system will have the capability of transforming or multiplying the bias that is already existing in the system. So this is in contrast to human, who may kind of lie or kind of not be open, because okay, for those that hire people or those that look for jobs and all that, you could see a situation where somebody would just come into an interview hall. You don't just like the person, but you can't really place your hand why you don't just like, even if the person is saying real, or even if the person is saying the real thing that is required for that role, you just see that naturally you just be like, okay, I don't know why I don't like this. I don't know why I don't like that. So it's just natural with human, but AI has actually helped us to improve the traditional human decision making. Now, we talked about data, which is the biggest culprit in all of this, because once the data is biased, it cascades to the AI model. How do we now create a diverse and a representative data? This is very key, and the truth of the matter is, that's why I have some concerns about the AI regulation and the EU regulation as regards to having high-risk AI products such as facial recognition that is being used by government, because in that sentence, the system or the algorithm or the data that is being used is not well represented, and it becomes a problem when it's not being even. Now, when we look at it from a holistic view, you see that data scientists fall back to synthetic data, and synthetic data don't give the true picture of what the environment is all about. Now, how do we make sure that we have a representative data all across? We could use what we call federated learning, which I'm very big at, and federated learning and federated analytics. What is federated learning? Federated learning is all about trying to train your algorithm. When you train your algorithm, you take that algorithm to another fresh form of data for that algorithm to learn from that data. That will reduce the issue of privacy and GDPR that we are having. That will increase reduce a lot of things that are being associated as regards to security in terms of data. So in that regard, we need to have that diverse and representative form of data when we train algorithms. Someone somewhere in the part of the world may be building a facial recognition system on the data that he or she is using. Another person, another part of the world may also be building a facial recognition system. Now, what you need to do once you're done, you bring your algorithm that you've learned learned to that data, because we can't transfer that data to the other region of the world. So this is what federated analytics is all about. And that's how we try to make sure that our data are diverse and represented. Now, we need to do more in terms of the pre-processing stages of our data. So this comes down to the accuracy, the possibility, and that's why the concept of counterfactual fairness comes into existence. And that is counterfactual fairness is where you try to exclude those protected characteristics like gender or those sensitive attributes from being part of the decision making within an AI algorithm system. That has actually worked out, and people and they're currently using it in the real sense. Now we need to look at using out multiple data validated tests, which kind of help us to check the input bias from the time the data was captured to the time the data was transferred and to the time it's been built by data scientists. So all of this, we need to do more in that regard. And when we've done the pre-processing, having a second look and a sensor checking of data pre-processing, we need to look at the post-processing. The post-processing is all about trying to transform the model prediction. So you've built an algorithm, you try to transform the model prediction, and that is what is called fairness constraint. So the fairness constraint is just a concept that you use to restrict the behavior of a output of a design or output of an algorithm, just kind of restrict it and see how it behaves in the real world. Now that comes down to looking at the algorithm itself or trying to build the algorithm transparency techniques. The transparency techniques could, that's why we have the explainable AI, responsible AI, because we're trying to build their transparency within algorithm. And part of what they part of the fairness constraint could be allocated or could be attached to algorithm transparency. But in algorithm transparency, what we are trying to do is to use the transfer learning approach. Some companies or researchers calls it they call it fairness aware learning, but we try to use the transfer learning concept in order to solve the difficulties that are embedded in neural network or black box experience of AI designs or AI systems and translate it. So that helps us to mitigate some of the biases in our day-to-day activity. Then when you build the algorithm, you don't stop at your algorithm. You need to do some algorithm testing. You need to do integration testing, algorithm integration testing. You need to also do performance algorithm testing. And you now look at finally the algorithm fairness testing. When all of these things are done, the next thing is to build a solid policy and a collaboration system, something like what we are discussing at something like a forum like this, where we are talking about biases that exist in different systems, and world leaders in different organizations needs to embrace this in order to engage in fact-based conversations about the potential bias that exists in human decision. And this is a growing field, and different research is ongoing at the moment in order to reduce bias. The truth still remains that humans transmit bias, the data itself transmit bias, but when we can't label algorithm of them transmitting bias unless humans make the decision. And overall, humans have a high role to play, and we need to start putting that accountability and responsibility in terms of humans' decision that we build with our AI system. So that is just a nutshell of how we are trying to build an AI ecosystem that is void of bias within the industry. Thank you.
Wow, thanks so much, Sebastian. I love that you chose to take the topic that has been discussed and kind of give us your insight. I think that was really valuable. We had a lot of conversation that we'll come on to a bit later, but we did have a couple of questions that I wanted to ask you. So Angela actually, in fact, asked, how can we develop a system that promotes diversity but without the detriment of the positive discrimination, and how many AIs would be required to balance the two problems which might be diametrically opposed?
So there's no one-way system where you can build such. So we need to make that known. But you can bring in one or two systems in order to regulate such process. So now and it also depends on the industry or the AI product on the system where you're working. So I'm going to take, for example, hiring processes. So if you want to build a diverse and inclusive system, then you need to look at it holistically. If you're using algorithm to build or to model people's CV and all that, you see that these days people use action words, and if some of those action words are within the CV, it becomes very easy for the AI system to filter it. But again, you need to sample it with different CVs that you have all over. That's part of the data representation that we are having, which creates that impact. So I feel that there are different ways and not a one-way system for you to create a diverse system or an AI system that is void of bias.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And I think we had another question, which was, is the federated analysis that you mentioned, is it already in place, and how is it currently being used, if so?
Yeah, it's already in place, but it's just that it's not well known. So let me explain more about what federated, and I'm super excited because this is what companies and governments needs to be looking into. So if I have a model that I want to build within my system and you are building, okay, let me just take, for example, during the pandemic, we could see that the genomic data was hard to get because it's not something you can just share within the cloud or something. So when institutions at different parts of the world are working on genomic data, building the algorithms, trying to design so many things that they want to design within that system, when you're done with them, you now bring your algorithm to our own data that sits within UK, assuming you are outside another country or you are in another region of the world, and train your algorithm within that system to learn. And so in that process, you are not touching the data. Just is the algorithm that is kind of interacting with the data. So these are the concepts that we need to start making loud or start singing it or making people to be aware of it so as to create that system that will be void of data privacy and reduce data privacy or security issues that people are clamoring for. But just think of it, it's just an irony that we say that we are in the world of big data, yet we are still saying that we don't have much data. So how do we place that balance? And that's why Google released this algorithm in 2019 in order to create that. And we need to start embracing it, because if I come to you and tell you, Naime, please give me the data of all the people, all the staff and workers in IO Associates, it's going to be difficult for you to release that. What do you want to do with the data? How do you want to do that? Even if I write it to freedom of information, it's difficult. But the purpose for me, which I want to request for that data, I bring my algorithm to you. I just give you my algorithm, run it on your data. I'm not going to see your data, just run it and give me the insight. Then I do my hyperparams along and to create it, to model the kind of things that I want to do. And so that's how it works. So it's a new field that we need to start talking about. Yes, yeah, we are implementing it in one way or the other within the industry.
Thank you. Thanks so much. That was really, really helpful. Great. Okay. Does anyone have any more questions? I don't think I can see any more in the chat. So if that's all good, then we will move on to, last but not least, Dave. And Dave is a partner at Public Digital, and I believe he's going to do a bit of myth busting to wrap us up.
Thank you. Yeah, hi everyone, I'm Dave. Just a brief bit of context. So I work at Public Digital. We're a small but growing consultancy. We work across the world with a range of different public and private sector clients. We're a digital transformation consultancy, so we work in digital in the broadest sense, so kind of design, data, technology, and so on. And in the work that I do, I find myself talking to a lot of leaders and practitioners and managers within organizations who are grappling with questions like, what do I do with technology? And at the moment, the fashionable question is, what do I do with AI? Or what do I do with generative AI? So I guess I'll state the obvious, like AI is having its moment in the sun. It's very much a hot topic. It's the hottest of AI summers right now. Or at least probably it was definitely 2 months ago. Maybe it's cooling off a tiny bit. I think that this kind of this situation is slightly kind of blinding people to the reality of what AI is and what it means for them and their organizations. There's a mixture of ways in which it's doing that. One is awe. So some people are just in awe of AI, and they read a lot of very, very exciting predictions about the future. Imagining that, their lives will be full of leisure time, they'll live forever. It's like the AI future is one that even kind of mainstream consultancies or very reputable media sources are kind of painting this very, very kind of exciting AI future for us, which I think is often overblown. I think you've got this fear. People think that they might lose their jobs. People worry about, exacerbation of societal biases. We've gone quite deep on that. They worry about immediate harms that this technology can cause. And then thirdly, I think there's this kind of mystique. So AI is a technology. I mean, I'm a software engineer by background, and technologies have kind of come and go through my career, whether it's kind of cloud or blockchain or Internet of Things, and obviously AI has kind of come and gone through that period. And I think my reflection is that AI probably has the most mystique. It's genuinely hard to understand what's going on when you scratch at it. If you're just a normal person, you don't necessarily have a background in technology or maths or statistics or anything like that, it immediately gets quite kind of technical and complicated and nuanced when you scratch below the surface. And the problem I think this creates is there's a lot of mistakes. There's a lot of people who are in powerful decision-making roles in organizations who really don't understand this, and are basing their understanding on quite a kind of surface level, but they worry about going deeper because of quite how scary it looks when you look beneath the surface. So I wanted to kind of maybe try and rub the shine off AI a little bit and try and explore what's behind that shine. Thankfully, my co-panelists have done quite a lot of work to kind of show some of that. I like to call it kind of wonkiness. I think there's a lot of wonkiness to AI. It's biased. It's massively carbon intensive. I don't think that's come up very much so far, but it's doing its best job to bring on that environmental singularity. It's causing immediate harm, and I'm the first person to make this point, but there's a lot of talk of speculative harm, but it's already causing harm. It's already, the disinformation's out there. Some kind of terrible applications of AI are out there. It's already causing harm. It's a bit of a problem. I'd say it's not unique in that regard. We must note here that we've had technologies around for a long time that have already been discriminatory and flawed. It's for example, a basic SQL databases have been recording binary gender for decades, and we haven't really got on top of that problem yet. You didn't need AI for that kind of intrinsic bias to be caused by technology. It's also very hyped. There's a huge financial incentive behind the growth of AI. It's really seen as something that might save Silicon Valley as a kind of an investment opportunity. Big tech have got money to be made. Startups have got money to make, and closer to home for me, consultancies have a lot of money to make. And I find it quite hard looking. I look at a lot of my competitors' material. It's quite hard to find consultancies that rub the shine off AI. You definitely get a lot of AI is amazing, here's the amazing future of AI, but everyone think about ethics. What you don't get is this kind of what's the reality? What does it look and feel like in your organization? It's increasingly expensive. There's a lot of subscriptions coming in on these AI services. It's going to create some inaccessibility around the technology. It's rightfully expensive because it burns a lot of carbon. Now, the areas where I think the wonkiness is less observed, I'd say first of all, I think AI is fundamentally experimental. I don't think it's experimental as a technology, but it's experimental in almost every way in which it's applied. If you look at the big examples of AI, they're kind of social experiments. It's what happens if we create this chat interface to something that's kind of drunk up? most of the internet and then and try to kind of, you know, give it back to you in the form of consolidated knowledge. I think it's a social experiment happening right now with you know, what's happening with that. I think it's surprising its creators. I've listened to kind of interviews with people who've made this stuff, and they're like, I'm not entirely sure I expected that kind of characteristic to emerge, but it did. That's possibly quite unique about AI, because a lot of other technologies, say, had a degree of, maybe they felt more predictable. And then finally, just quite how unpredictable this is as a technology in terms of its applications. So another thing I find fascinating is, I'd say one of the most dominant narratives for AI is it's going to replace jobs. Now, whenever kind of I hear examples of where jobs are going to get replaced, you get this very narrow view of, like, a human used to do the thing, the AI is going to come in and do that thing instead. What's not explored is, well, what's the system level effect of the fact that you've gone in and just like replaced a robot with a human? Sorry, human with a robot. An example of that is that people talk about, right, it's going to be much quicker to put in, say, really complicated commercial bids. So therefore, all people who write commercial bids and commercial bid teams are going to be more efficient, end of story. What they haven't accounted for is that surely you'll get 10 times as many bids, and then the people that have to read these bids are either going to be doing something awful, like summarizing them with AI, which is the kind of nonsense that definitely scares me, or they just simply have more work to do. So you've shifted the fundamental problem of, like, trying to understand whether you want to buy something or not. You haven't really solved the problem, you've shifted the problem. So why have I become interested in this angle in AI is, so my own background as a software developer, and I guess I experienced so many technologies in my career that were exciting and were pushed, but weren't the answer to the problem at hand. And I've worked a lot in the public sector. I've worked in justice and proximate to lots of interesting public sector problems, and problems like homelessness and justice and healthcare are areas where the application of AI, particularly in areas of, I would emphasize the care end of healthcare. These are spaces where it's extremely challenging to get that actual benefit you're trying to realize with the application of technology. They are deep social problems that we have. And I guess, like, probably the absolute kind of peak of this thing I experience, I call hype rage, which is when everyone gets extremely excited about something that definitely isn't as good as everyone says it is, with blockchain. Now, with blockchain, I mean, definitely a separate conversation, but I really don't think it solves any problems. And we can have a chat about that should the opportunity arise. But for AI, it's been quite different. I responded with hype rage, but then the more I read, the more I understood, the more I explored, the more I was like, okay, there's definitely something really quite different about this. Maybe it's got characteristics a bit like the emergence of the internet. It's going to be big, but it's also very, very wonky. And the early internet was very, very wonky. So what's the answer to all this? This is my kind of sum up, really. I've got a kind of balanced philosophy when it comes to technology, which is, I think it's always important to kind of try and see things from kind of two competing sides. So I think we need to retain the optimism and enthusiasm for what AI can do, but we have to measure it with pragmatism. I think I'm saying something incredibly obvious there, but I also think it's not necessarily how a lot of people think about AI. We need to kind of, I think we need to reduce the fear. I mean, the singularity, I find that fascinating, particularly now I've discovered there are 6 of them to worry about, not just one. But I do think there's, I mean, my singularity is now. I can't see beyond the impact of AI from today, to be honest. I think a lot of how people predict the future on this is very speculative. But I do think a lot of the fears are unfounded, and that narrative about how job replacement isn't quite the kind of simple narrative that's often pushed, particularly by consultancies, is a simplified narrative. It's going to be more complicated, and that more complicated thing is that humans are going to be very, very much more in the picture. to solve the resulting problems from the application of AI. And finally, I think it's just important to demystify AI. So I think I really want people, I want leaders and organizations, decision makers and organizations to really have a sense of like, what is this technology? How can I use it? And a really important thing for me is like, what's the impact that's out of my control? Because so many people are coming at this from the angle of what's my organization's strategy? How am I going to apply AI? When actually the first order effects are all coming from the outside. It's people are writing job applications with ChatGPT. People are can do much more sophisticated social engineering attacks, threatening your cybersecurity. There's mass uptake of completely random usage of the abundance of AI tools by individuals in a kind of shadowland of your IT strategy. And these for me, these are the really, really real first order effects that we're seeing of kind of mass use of AI. And organizations really have to kind of grapple with those outside impacts as much as what they do with AI. So yeah, thanks for the opportunity to speak. Back to you.
Great, thank you so much, Dave. No, I think that's really, really insightful to come from that perspective. As you say, the consulting thing, it's really interesting to hear that a lot of your clients and the people you're working with are wanting to find out whether they need to be afraid of it or what they need to do with it or how to prepare. I've actually had a question from someone that I think would be really relevant to you, someone who wasn't able to join today, but will watch the recording. So he asked, what are your thoughts on Elon Musk's recent announcement on his AI ventures and his approach to moralistic AI and need to put a pause on further AI growth?
Oh, wow. I mean, I think I've got a few layers of opinions here. I maybe have personal opinions about Elon's style. I have a personal family connection to Twitter and the workplace, so we won't go there. What's my opinion on his kind of AI stuff? I think for me, I actually think the pause, for me, it's part of a kind of wider performative narrative that is actually amping up AI. I think a huge amount of money is going to be made out of AI through the fear angle. It makes AI so exciting. If people are saying, and I think it's there will be different perspectives on this, and I'm definitely not an AI expert, but I'm possibly an expert on like the impact of technology on organizations. I'm pretty sure most of those kind of singularities aren't coming anytime soon. But if people think they are, then it makes AI, as I say, it makes AI incredibly exciting. It makes it something to kind of invest in, because clearly there'll be a lot of money to be made in 20 years before the robots take over. So I think, yeah, I think the pause is slightly performative, and I also think it's kind of unimaginable how you'd actually go about it, because no one could even decide what the edge of AI is. So how you could pause it, I'm not sure. I really hope it wouldn't pause all of software, which sometimes gets bracketed with AI because it's kind of automation.
Great, and I'd like to open that one up to the other speakers too, if anyone else would like to share their opinions.
So I think I am an AI expert, so I think Elon has got potentially. I was in Napa Valley actually, and Elon was there recently, and so I think we all know the narrative of OpenAI. OpenAI was meant to be an antidote to Google's kind of more closed approach, but through various factors has become kind of more closed, and Elon is concerned that that OpenAI needs an antidote, so he's creating an open version. Now, we can all speculate about whether he's doing it for good reasons or bad reasons or whatever. I have my own opinions, but I think the key thing that Elon has said that I think is important is that any technology that has a material impact on humanity has been regulated, whether it be aerospace or pharmaceuticals or whatever, and automotive, and I believe that AI can have and is having a material impact on society, and therefore should be carefully regulated. So I don't think so. So people think that I said that I sent them the pause letter not because I thought they would pause, but because there are genuine risks from the surface from my community who've been researching this stuff for many decades. That there is a concern that we could build a superintelligence, and it could be our biggest existential threat, including Sam Altman. I mean, I spoke to Sam Altman a few years ago, and he thinks that by the end of the decade we will have AGI, so an AI that is as smart as all of us, not necessarily a super intelligence, but if you reach an AGI that's as smart as all of us and ask it to go and create smarter AIs, then in theory it can, and then you have this potentially what is called a fast takeoff, which means that you could get to super intelligence very quickly. Nobody knows. The point is that nobody knows. So I think speculating one way or the other is ridiculous. But I do think that there is a risk, and we need to be potentially mitigating ourselves from that risk, because we don't know what's going to happen in 20 years. Doesn't mean that if an alien called us up and said, we're coming in 20 years, be prepared, we would be preparing ourselves. And I think that the concern is that this thing might come in the next 20 years and we should be preparing for it. It's coming from a superintelligence perspective. But in terms of the other singularities that I've mentioned, yes, AI has challenged our political foundations, and over the next 2 years it's going to continue to challenge our political foundations. It's going to continue to be weaponized very strongly to manipulate people's decisions. So I think that there's a great deal to be concerned about, and by the way, I'm not trying to use fear to make more money. I'm trying to raise awareness around the consequences of misusing these technologies, which can have a dramatically negative effect on humanity. So I'm going to stop there.
No, thank you so much. And yeah, I think that's really helpful. Don't know, Sebastian or Angela, did you want to share any insights here?
Not much insights, but I find it interesting you mentioned politics. I live in Yorkshire, and we now actually have an AI-powered MP standing in our current election. I am not joking. He's apparently doing his things to do with that, and I find it an interesting concept, especially with my opinions to do with the bias in the system. But ultimately, it does show you that it is going to start affecting our political landscape. Look at anything. Technology can affect anything. It can affect elections. It can affect global warming. It depends on what goes on, what's going to happen. So ultimately, I think it's just going to be a case of we have to just deal with it at some point. I hate to say it. Kick it down the road.
Deal with it or educate people, decision makers, whether they be in government or companies, to make sure that they're facing into some of the consequences. And I think, I probably agree with Dave that over the next few years we're not going to see much really change. It takes business cycles, asking for budget, procuring vendors, integrating it into our organization. It takes a while to get technologies embedded, and it will be the same for AI. It won't be an immediate kind of sudden transition, but my day job is essentially freeing people up from tasks. So we build algorithms that free up hundreds, maybe even thousands of people from work, and I know that over the next several years there's an aspiration for many large organizations to do the same thing. And the concern is, if we achieve that, then you will create mass technological employment. And I would defer to Callum Chase, who has been writing about this stuff for well over 2 decades, thought deeply about it, and so if you are concerned with the economic singularity, he's the person that coined the term, and I'd start there.
Great, thank you. And it looks like we've got one more question. So if anyone else wanted to ask anything, if you could just put that in the chat now. But Don has asked, what do the presenters think are the biggest single challenge that businesses will face in realizing this AI ambition?
I'll go first on that one. You're gonna struggle with reining people in a lot of the time. I'm quite mean when it comes to Magpie developers, but it's quite common that people just go, I want that buzzword, I want to be working with that. I know that our clients at Codurance are interested in these things, but it's a case of sometimes it's even going down the road, well, you don't need that yet. You just actually need to look at your historic data to make predictions. You don't need to have an AI to do that. You just need to look at the data. At the end of the day, you get more sales at Christmas. Make sure you've got stock. Silly things like that ultimately might be more important than going down the route of implementing neural networks, whatever it is. I am definitely not the expert here, but ultimately those items are, it's often putting a bandage on something that is very, very small.
I'll echo that, and I guess I'll echo also what Dave said, which is, so I know that we're all calling generative AI, and hopefully I gave with my 6 applications that, you know, there are different types of algorithms, data, compute that have converged over the past 2 decades that allow us to do different things in our organizations, not just create content, but solve complex problems and task automation and things like that. And the biggest challenge that I've seen over the past 15 years, 20 years is companies matching the technologies with the problems that they have, and because they get seduced by the hype, they hire data scientists to solve decision problems, etc. And so I think it's important for those business leaders to educate themselves, to sober themselves up, to make sure that they're applying the right technologies, if technology is even needed, to solve the problems that they have in their organization.
Yeah, so I mean, that thought resonates with me as well. And that comes to the point where we start looking at what are those ambitions businesses are looking for, because ambition differs. And someone may, in his business, may be looking for to use AI in order to be a superpower within the ecosystem, just as we have seen within the 2 giant players and Elon Musk calling for a pause and all that. So it depends on what the ambition is for businesses. But the most important thing is adoption, and what the problem is that they're trying to solve needs to be clearly defined by those businesses. Once that is done, then I think there won't be any mismatch, just as Dave said, in trying to bring out technologies to solve their problem.
I think from my perspective, the biggest challenge, I mean, partly I'd answer it in similar ways to other panelists, which is to say, your ambition shouldn't be AI. Your ambition should be whatever your business is trying to achieve, and AI is possibly one way of getting there. But I think, you know, let's assume that kind of AI is the answer to the question. I think the challenge is going to be system side effects. So you will apply AI to one part of your business or directly to the market. And in making something more efficient, like what kind of side effects are you going to be dealing with, and how does that kind of impact you as an organization? I think there'll be some really strange effects that they're going to see as people start to apply AI to certain parts of complex systems.
Great. Thanks so much. It looks like that was the last question. I don't think anyone else. Oh, we've just had one more. So considering the recent limitations in scraping social media data, what is the new way to scrape data from the web and social media?
I mean, you can scrape data from the web. It doesn't mean you're allowed to. And so I think anything that you can do as a human being on the web, you can get an algorithm to do. It just I wouldn't necessarily assume that you can use it to train models and things like that, because a lot of that data is copyrightable, and there's obviously a huge initiative now to make sure that large language models are trained on data that have the right provenance and things like that. And again, we're going to see a lot of interesting things happen over the next few years. Japan is actually interestingly, Japan said it doesn't matter if it's on the web, then it's, you know, it's everyone, it's up to everyone to use that to use that data. But I don't think it's fair that if somebody creates something of value, that then something else is benefiting from that value then isn't passed or attributed to that person. So yeah, it's a complex problem to solve.
Well, just I mean, I'm just laughing over this question because there was something I posted on my wall as at yesterday saying that it's about to go down when I saw Mark he took pictures with some of these notable boxers. I'm now like, is he getting ready to boss Elon Musk or something? So I mean, it's very interesting to what is happening in the industry, and that's how tough the AI race is all about. But again, I mean, you can use APIs in order to scrape data from sites that you want. But obviously, at the moment, you can't get data from Twitter unless you pay for it. So yeah, there are other places that you want to get it. But it's interesting to see what trend it's all about that Mark established. Hopefully, there's going to be a big AI race and competition within the industry. Then researchers can come back to life in looking at some of those research processes based on socioeconomic and diversities that we see out there. So yeah, fingers crossed. It's just at the early stage to see these big competitors showing their muscles and trying to tell us how. And that's why we need to see that there's going to be a big dichotomy between the AI players and the AI users. So you need to know where you fall in within this, because if I control the technology, I dictate how it will be used in that process. Thank you.
Thank you. Looks like we don't have any more questions, so I'll wrap this up now. Thank you so much to Daniel, Angela, Sebastian and Dave for all your insights and sharing all your knowledge. I feel this was really valuable and I've really learned a lot tonight. As mentioned, this will be recorded, so a copy will be available on our website. And yeah, any further questions, please feel free to reach out. I'm sure no one will mind answering if you think of anything after. Thanks, everyone.